Hello and welcome to another episode of the Able to Care podcast. I'm your host, Andy Baker, and joining me as usual is my co-host, Nadine Sutton.
Hello.
Hello. Nadine's struggling a little bit with her voice today, so she sounds a little sultry in the way she's communicating. But
if you class Phil Mitchell as sultry, then that's what I'm going for.
The Phil Mitchell sound. Yeah, it's nice. So we are discussing on today's podcast. We haven't got a guest this time. We thought we'd do it internally, but we're talking about mental health, but specifically mental health for men. This is obviously a bit of a subject that seems to be gaining some traction at the moment. There seems to be a little bit of a growing awareness, and there's a few reasons for that we'll kind of go through. It's a subject obviously quite close to both of our hearts, really, isn't it? Because directly or indirectly, both of us have been affected, both with mental health and obviously men in your life and people in my life as well as myself as we'll go through. I've kind of experienced challenges with mental health issues. So I think I thought we'd talk about, start off with is obviously a slight shift in our understanding and perception of mental health generally. And there's obviously still is a stigma around it, and we'll introduce that idea specifically around men. But just generally, I think there's still some level of stigma around mental health.
I think there is, and I think there always will be, because there is some people out there that genuinely just haven't experienced it, and that's okay. Like, it's not a negative thing that they haven't, but it doesn't always allow those types so it doesn't allow that understanding. I think it's a case of pull your socks up, you'll be all right, and it's just not as easy as that. However, though, I do think it's got better.
Definitely. I think there's a lot more awareness kind of raised. People are talking about it more. It's changed dramatically. Even in the last 10 years or so, there has been some big changes. I still think it's a little bit of, I find it strange in some ways, as far as there's still this big separation between physical health and mental health. And I understand it from the point that you can't see physical health, but you can't necessarily see a chronic illness, for instance. We still do have those stigmas even around disabilities, don't we? With when somebody parks in a disabled parking spot, there's an expectation almost to see them limping away or in a wheelchair as they're kind of walking away, rather than going, well, they may be able to walk, but they may not be able to walk for long. And I think that's a similar thing with mental health as well, that you can't see it as an expectation, and you shouldn't be able to cope with life. You shouldn't, if you actually have mental health issues, you shouldn't be able to cope with life. You should be just, I don't in the asylum kind of old mentality.
I think it's that old school way of thinking, isn't it? If you've got depression, then you're lying in bed all day, you're not talking to anybody, you're not washing, you're not dressing. Where many people can do those things, but they are still not working at full mental health. So one of the things I think has been a shift, which is worth talking about, is what we refer to as a mental health continuum. So once upon a time, it used to be kind of the medical model, where it's a case of you were either well or you were unwell. So you either didn't have mental health or you had mental health issues. So I think the continuum is worthwhile kind of drawing attention to, so the continuum, I know we're both aware of this, but it's looking at, rather than just a diagnosis, it's also looking at well-being. So you may have somebody who has a diagnosis of a mental health condition, like depression disorder or anxiety disorder or schizophrenia, for instance, but actually their mental well-being is in quite a good place. They're doing okay. So they're coping with their condition, they're engaging, they are coping. They're managing well.
They're managing their condition, absolutely. Whereas on the other side, you could have somebody who has no diagnosis whatsoever, whose mental well-being is extremely poor, and they're really struggling to cope, and they're not managing their well-being very successfully. So you've got these four kind of aspects. You might have the condition diagnosed, but your well-being's good, or you might have the condition, your well-being might be bad, or you might have no diagnosis and your well-being is good, or you might have no diagnosis and your well-being is bad. So looking at those kind of four sections, and as a spectrum as well, where you're not necessarily at the extremes, you could be somewhere in between, which I think is a really useful way to people start thinking about mental health.
I think when we've delivered it on courses, I think people have identified with that a lot easier than rather just saying, that I just have bad days and good days. It can be a little bit more complex than that. So I've noticed definitely, when we show the continuum, people can kind of identify and say, well, yeah, I do have depression, but not every day is always an awful day, and I can get up and go to work. Or do you know what? I don't have a diagnosis, and I do experience those really low days and things like that. So I think people generally find, once it's explained, because when you look at it, it can look a little bit overwhelming, but once it's explained, people find it a lot easier, and they seem to understand it better.
Definitely. I think one of the things I sometimes use as well is it trying to get people to think of things in a spectrum, because I think there is many people out there who have experienced very low mood, and they might describe that as depression. So then when you have somebody else who also has a diagnosis of depression, they're going, well, I went through that and I did this and I overcame it. And I try and get people to think about it in a similar way, to kind of, there's a cold version, there's a flu version, there's a pneumonia version, there's a COPD version. It's similar to problems with breathing or problems with your airway. It kind of could be just, you sometimes get an asthma attack, or it could be chronic and it's ongoing. And looking at it in a similar physical health way, that it is a spectrum. So, will I cope with that? Well, maybe you had the cold version rather than the pneumonia version. And I think that's quite a good way of kind of separating.
I think we're slowly getting there with that as well. Like, people are understanding. It's not like, obviously there's more work to do as always, but I know that I've had conversations around anxiety, and people have said, well, what's your anxiety like? How does your anxiety present? And I thought that was a really good question to ask, because my anxiety doesn't present in the same way as yours, for example. So absolutely. I think people are understanding a little bit more. We're slowly getting there. Eventually we will. Slowly
but surely, definitely. And I think but I think there's a flip side to that as well, isn't there? As far as that certain mental health conditions are kind of overly focused on in some ways as well. I don't mean overly focused on, overused. So like if I watch a movie and feel sad, I'm not depressed.
Yes.
Whereas you hear people kind of say, oh, I'm depressed because I watched that movie.
Yeah.
Or where people are, I like to have my cupboard arranged in a certain way. That's my OCD. And it's like, well, no.
Yeah. I struggle with this a little bit, because I hear younger generations just kind of say, oh God, I feel depressed today, or I feel anxious. And like, don't get me wrong, it does happen in younger people. But I just worry sometimes with overuse of the words. It takes away its weight a little bit and its seriousness.
Yeah.
That's where I find I struggle. So even with anxiety, like, we all get anxious about something, but it's also recognising the anxiety is not always a particularly nasty, horrible thing. It's like that worry drives us to do things. So I personally just worry about that the terminology is overused, definitely.
Yeah, and I think with overusing it, it's sometimes, words have power, words have meaning. If I'm saying depressed, then that could affect my mood. If rather than saying I'm slightly nervous about this, I'm saying I'm suffering with anxiety, then again, there's a difference in that. And again, it's not to belittle anybody who is experiencing genuinely, poor mental well-being, but I think it's an easy trap to fall into of maybe over dramatizing or even self-convincing. That we all feel low at times, and that's okay to not be okay at those periods. That doesn't mean you definitely then have a diagnosis.
It's all right to have a bad day. It's okay to have a low day. It's like that. That's fine.
Yeah.
If it continues, that's when we need some additional support.
And I suppose it's similar to some of the other things that we've spoken about, as far as there's a difference between a condition and a disorder.
Yeah.
A disorder impacts on your ability to engage in day-to-day life, whereas we can all have certain differences in the way our brain's working or things like that, So I think that's probably a useful way of kind of looking at it as well, isn't it? Is it a disorder, or is it just a condition that you're experiencing at the moment?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it.
So obviously, as we go through, we're going to kind of focus, and there's a couple of videos that we're going to look at through the session today as well, that are associated with. One's very current, it's called Man Down, isn't it? Man Down in Cornwall, which are a charity, have just released a video which very impactful. But we wanted to focus a little bit around mental health in men. One of the reasons for this is, there's a lot of misunderstanding around mental health, and we're going to go into some aspects, and obviously kind of trigger warning kind of thing, as far as, do make sure you're okay as you're watching this. We will be talking about some subjects that might kind of affect people. But suicide at the moment is still the biggest killer of men under the age of 50 in the UK. So it's bigger than heart disease and Alzheimer's and car accidents and everything like that. So that's a significant figure as far as more men are ending their life through suicide than anything else at the moment. So this is a real and genuine problem that now there's some misunderstanding about this. And I think it's, and we'll go into kind of the differences of why is that difference in men and women. There is a few things that I think are worth considering that sometimes get ignored. One is that men are far more likely to impulsively try and end their life, whereas there seems to be a greater planning process for females typically.
Gents don't usually tend to discuss it or disclose it beforehand, do they, that they're feeling that way?
Absolutely. It's kind of a momentary decision in that moment. So that's going to affect their ability to talk about it and those sorts of things. The other one is that men seem to choose more violent forms of ending their life. Than women seem to typically. So, and again, if you think about, ending your life through jumping in front of a moving vehicle, for instance, it's a little bit more kind of yes or no, black and white, than the opportunity for somebody, if you've overtaken pills, for instance, somebody might find you, somebody else might recover, you know, whereas one's very final and one maybe has better chance of surviving. So when we look at the statistics, men are more likely to end their life, but the way they do end their life seems to be a little bit more violent and final. But there is quite a few other factors as well. So we pulled over some statistics and we've done some research. Okay,
we like research.
We do like research. So the Priory Group did a study. And they found that 77% of men, it was a study of, I think, of 1,000 people, and now 77%, I put my teeth back in, men suffered with anxiety, stress and depression, but 40% of them have never ever spoken about it. So out of that 77%, 60 said they had sought help and so whereas 40% said they'd never raised it and they'd never spoken to anybody else about it. So I know that you've got some close family members and stuff like that, and I know you've spoken to them and stuff.
Yeah, so I've got permission, bless him, from my dad. It's what brought it all around, really. We had this conversation and it was a really distressing conversation, and he was telling me how he just previously felt and what he felt in that moment, but I found it really tough because I've never heard him speak like that before. So my dad, obviously you've met him, he is one stoic guy. He is everything what you think a British man is. So he's not a politician, obviously, more like an hooligan, but he's this guy that doesn't talk about feelings, very rarely showed emotion as I was growing up. But, gave us the odd cuddle and stuff like that, but he wasn't an emotional sort of person. Now, obviously I won't go into his private life too much, but lots of different things were happening. Work ending being one, so going into retirement played a huge part and a big factor in this. And the distressed phone call was just really upsetting. He just said, I had this thought, I don't want to be here anymore. And the thought was very violent and it was very sort of it would have been a very quick end. I'm so glad that he rang and spoke to me about it after. I told him it was okay, that he wasn't a bad person for feeling like this. And we've been much more open and honest with each other around that, but it was shocking, and I don't know why, even though the job that I do what I do, it was really shocking to hear that he'd felt like that. I kind of didn't know what to do, and I'm going to be honest with you there, because he'd never behaved this way before. It almost felt alien. Now if it was anybody else who were able to show emotion and things like that, because he's not an emotional person, I would have thought that I'd had the skills better, but because it was him, someone so close, I was stuck. I was massively stuck. And, with him, I'm so glad that we did talk about it, and we've spoke about it since and stuff. And, he's been really open and honest about it, which is a really powerful thing. But for him to get to that point, it took that for him to be as open and honest as he is now about how he feels, bless him.
You said one thing in there that you never really seen him show emotion. Just out of interest, and if you can remember back, would you say, however, that anger is an emotion that you did see from him?
Yes, so I'm sorry, I didn't see emotional, like he wouldn't cry. So he never when he did, if we did see him cry, he would he'd almost choke on his own tears, like because he didn't want to cry in front of people.
Yeah.
When we gave him a hug, he was so stiff.
Yeah, yeah.
It's almost like he couldn't bear us touching him.
Yeah.
But anger, Jesus, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Could F and Jeff on him, in a bit of road rage and stuff.
I think so. The reason I asked that question is because I was a very sensitive lad when I was young. That my go-to was to cry.
Yeah.
That whenever I got upset, when anybody hurt my feelings, whenever I was in pain or anything like that, my go-to was to cry. Unfortunately, because I was perceived as that sensitive lad, it was seen as a weakness.
Yeah.
And you've got the typical parenting thing. My parents never been, massively invalidating or uncaring, but it is that kind of pull yourself together, enjoy the pain, it doesn't last long, those kind of statements.
Talk,
yeah, it is 100%. And I'm not saying that's 100% wrong in some ways. But even when I went through a period of my life where I was getting bullied, and I used to get so overwhelmed, and I used to become tearful, and I'd make an excuse that. So I was doing karate at the time, and therefore I used to make an excuse. It was more an emotional pain that I was experiencing, but I made the excuse that this lad had hurt me, which had made me cry, because it was sometimes okay for children to cry because you were hurt. It wasn't okay to cry because you couldn't cope with verbal abuse or picking on or teasing or things like that. That's not appropriate.
But actually masking where the hurt came from.
Yes, so I pretended it was that they'd caused me physical pain because that was okay. So I used to sit off and kind of be upset. But it took me a long time to realise that what I needed to do to reduce that weakness, because that caused further victimisation in the fact that I was weak and going off and crying. And I had to shift that over and start using and masking the hurt with anger, with aggression. Yeah. So my temper developed. But I still sometimes, that anger is a way of protecting myself from pain.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I asked that question, as far as I think there's certain emotions that are acceptable.
I agree, yeah. So it's much easier if I see somebody crying, and I'm going to be open and honest about this as well. Like if I see somebody crying, I can go to them and calm them down and look after them, be empathic towards them. Whereas if somebody's angry, I genuinely feel like I wouldn't approach an angry person to try and calm them down, because I don't want to get hurt in the process.
Yeah, absolutely.
And especially, and I know, again, gender, males, I wouldn't approach an angry male.
Yeah.
And say, hey, are you okay? What's wrong?
Yeah.
Out of fear that I'll probably get smacked around the head or something.
I think I heard a quote the other day, which was that anger is a punishment we give ourselves for other people's behaviour.
Yeah.
And I think although anger definitely has its place as far as emotions are concerned, it has a use. It tells us certain things about things not being right. I think it is a masking emotion. It feels like we're more in control of anger than we are maybe pain and stuff like that. So there's a couple of videos that I think could be worthwhile looking at. One is this man down one that's from Cornwall. So what we do is we're going to kind of show it up on the screen for those people watching. For those of you who are just listening to the podcast, we'll make sure we put some description in afterwards.
Bells, here's your coat, all right? Come on, let's go.
Ready to go? No. What's Daddy like?
It's cold. Are you glad you got your coat on?
Come on then. Hey.
So obviously for those of you who are just listening, it is called Man Down Campaign Film 24. So if you do kind of want to watch it, obviously there's not a lot of communication in it. But to kind of summarize, it's a family all traveling over or going on holiday. It's a mum, dad and daughter by the look of it. And I think one of the things it kind of shows in there that you can see an element of sadness at times when he has that moment of looking into the distance. But a lot of the time there's smiles and there's laughing and engaging with his family in quite a typical way, not something you would ever pick up on. And then it later on in the video, it cuts to the point where it's the mum and the daughter just going to the same holiday place, but on their own. Nothing needs to be said. It's kind of obvious what's happened in that situation. I did hear or read, and I couldn't find a statistic for this or where this came from, but I did hear a thing about that. One of the reasons that many men don't end their life is purely because of the people that it'll hurt and affect, rather than because they are happy and enjoying life. It's one of the things I think's worth kind of addressing as far as suicide and especially suicide, is that I have heard people refer to it as being quite a selfish act. And there's an element I can understand how the people left behind feel that way, because it feels like it's something that hurt them and they're the ones that are left suffering, where that person doesn't have to suffer anymore. I think what's important to kind of recognize and be careful around that kind of language is that selfishness is done for a person's own personal gratification and benefit, just purely through definitional. So ending your life is definitely not for your own personal gain. So that straight away, the definition of selfishness just goes out the window as soon as you kind of mention that particular point. I think obviously I know that you were chatting earlier with somebody and talking about the difference between self-harm and suicide. And I think that's worthwhile. And when sorry. So when I've been through a period where I suicide was a very real thought and an option and an attempt for me. I'll say I never wanted to die. That was never how I felt. Sorry.
Don't be sorry. I've got nothing to be sorry about. It's a good job you don't wear makeup, else you'd be a right mess by now.
So obviously we just had to come off for a moment there because I started to get a bit overly emotional. And I think it's worth referring to that my instinct straight away was to apologise. And I think that's, again, that is an instinct, obviously partly because I'm messing up the podcast because I can't talk while I'm crying. But it's also that instinct of kind of I shouldn't be feeling this way and showing this way. So I'll try and effectively get through.
I think by you showing how you're feeling and stuff like that is a doorway for loads of guys out there to be able to show it.
Yeah, I was saying it was related to suicide. It was never because I wanted to die. It was only ever because I didn't want to feel anymore. And that's it. It was almost I would describe it. I wanted to go to sleep. I just wanted to stop thinking. I wanted to experience the pain. I just wanted to sleep. And if I could have found a way of just turning my brain off, or putting myself to sleep in a non-painless way, then that's what I would have done. It wasn't ever, and I think that's important, because in that moment when I've been in that very, very dark place and felt like that was the only option that I had, of course everything as far as, the people that I would hurt, my parents, my son, and everybody that mattered to me. Of course, huge amounts of shame and guilt and stuff like that associated with those feelings. It was never a case of, I don't care about anybody else. It was very much a case of, I just don't know how to cope with this, and I just don't want to feel this.
Yeah.
So I think, we just need to be careful as far as kind of that kind of language as far as selfishness is concerned, because we could all be selfish at times, but there's never.
I feel like it's probably, I don't know if I'm wrong here, but from like it being selfish, I think there's a part of a person who's at that point, and maybe you felt it, that people would be better off without me anyway. So how can it be selfish if that's the train of thought or the thinking?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
If I do this, the problem's going to go away for everybody. So I think people that say that it's selfish, like again, family members, I can't sit here and say what they should or shouldn't be feeling, but anybody else should shut up, basically, and take selfish out of that.
Yeah, 100%.
That's my word on that,
I think, and this is maybe where it's worth talking about the kind of reason that's important, and this is a two-sided coin in some ways. That if we take your dad, for instance, the typical stoic British man and stuff like that, and sometimes described as, even that realm of toxic masculinity and things like that.
He's a bit rough around the edges, we'll say.
But I think we need to put it in perspective in some point that, this stoicism, it is an important male trait to some degree, maybe less significant now than it ever was. But if you look at when we were hunter-gatherers, it was very much a case of when we were warring, when we were tribal and we were kind of in these warring, you couldn't show weakness, because weakness would make you vulnerable to the enemy, or you would kind of, we're out hunting and gathering, I couldn't kind of go, I'm feeling a bit low today, so we don't need to worry about eating. It was very much a case of, we just got to crack on. Yeah. I think obviously there is some big differences in society as far as, an increase in mental health and the effect of poor mental well-being in today's society, especially in some Western cultures as well, particularly in comparison to what we used to, because we were too busy once upon a time, I think, as far as, going out hunting, gathering, making sure we had jobs to do. And I think there is a lot more time that we are left thinking. There's a great book called Sapiens. I have to apologise for not remembering the name of the author, that talks about, that human beings with this high level of cognition, we have too much time now to kind of think and ponder and have that negative inner talk and stuff.
I'd agree with that to a certain extent. Like with my dad, he obviously, I can't sit here and say whether he did or he didn't struggle with mental health in the past, because I don't know. Yeah, I've seen him sad, I've seen him angry, I've seen him mad, but otherwise I wouldn't have known until recently. And with that, retirement. What's my purpose? What am I doing that's meaningful? Who am I any use to now?
Yeah.
And obviously a collection of other stuff going on as well. I think, that time sometimes is not someone's best friend.
No, I think what you just raised there as far as purpose and meaning, I think is a big factor. I think there's a bit of a shift culturally. Maybe one of the reasons we're seeing this increase, I think it was the highest rates were in 30 to 39, and now I think it has increased slightly to 40 to 49, which seems to be, and I think there seems to be this intermediate generation that you did have the kind of the stiff upper lip and, just crack on and there is evidence, for instance, that, the fake it till you make it thing, that smiling can make you feel happier and therefore the lower you become and stuff like that. So is it a case of being stoic and kind of keeping a smile on your face does kind of make a slight difference? I don't think it's significant enough to kind of prevent or mean that a person feels better, but the more we I know there's studies around Botox. Botox seems to reduce depression to a certain degree because it prevents a feedback loop of.
Let's get booked in.
It also reduces, sexual enjoyment and stuff like that. So, pros and cons. But because it prevents the same muscle movement, it prevents a feedback loop. So when we smile, our brain goes, "Oh, you're smiling, you must be happy," and it creates a feedback loop. So when we're sad, we then pull a down face, and that gives us a feedback loop. So if that Botox inhibits that, so is that same kind of thing? If I'm pretending to be happy, does that have a slight impact as far as...
Me and you have had these discussions. Obviously we both speak openly about mental health. Yeah. I don't have some good days sometimes. Yeah. But one of my things is that I get I force myself to go to work. I'm money driven. I need the money to pay the bills.
Yeah.
So I have to go to work. I can't, I think that will create more stress and worry if I don't. And I can remember a few times I've said to you, I'm so glad I did that, because it forced me to put on a show. Yeah. Like underneath, my delegates won't know that Nadine doesn't feel okay today, or she's feeling a bit anxious or sad.
Yeah.
But because I've put that performance on it, I've always almost made myself believe that you're okay and you're going to get through today. It's a day by day thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I sometimes find that when I'm struggling, I do need to go out. I know that I'm going to be putting on the facade, but sometimes I feel better for putting on that facade a little bit because it's sometimes at least a bit active. Yeah,
it's a bit of an escape from your own mind, I think, sometimes.
I think so. One of the things within when you're looking at cognitive behavioral therapy as well is what's called activity scheduling. And when people are experiencing low mood and anxiety, one of the symptoms, and I can never remember how to pronounce it, but adihina or something like that. So it's basically you lack enjoyment in things you used to enjoy. You no longer experience pleasure in the same ways you did before. And because then all of the things you did before, you're no longer experiencing joy and pleasure from, you start to pull back from them. But actually then that exasperates. It actually makes it worse, not better. So the depression causes you to pull back, but then the lack of social engagement and engaging in joyful activities actually then perpetuates it. So one of the things in CBT that you do is you basically keep an activity diary, looking at what you're doing over the week to kind of see how often are you leaving the house and doing things. It breaks it down to typically 4: exercise, something you enjoy, something with a sense of achievement, and something social. And then what you try and introduce is, well, let's try and introduce at least a few of those bits: something social, something that sense of achievement, something you enjoy, and something as far as exercise is concerned, and slowly increase that over a period of time, because that change in behavior actually can help to improve the mood. But I think it's worth, when we're talking about this aspects of faking it or turning up to work, I think we just need to be careful that, again, it's the pneumonia version versus cold version, isn't it? Definitely. Do you know what I mean? And
it's whatever works for that person, isn't it? And don't get me wrong, I have had those times where I couldn't show up for work and I couldn't get out of bed and stuff like that. So I just think people will have their different ways of coping with it, men and women. And maybe men, not crying is their way of...
I think it is.
Like some men, obviously not
all
men.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's where...
I think we do whatever we can just to survive the day.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I think... and that's where, it shouldn't just be a case of when we're looking at the biopsychosocial model that, it isn't nature nurture. It's a combination of biological factors, environmental factors, and social or psychological factors.
January factors.
And that's a little bit of seasonal affective disorder as well, yeah. So when we're looking at overcoming mental ill health, we need to look at that as well. That some people, I always think medication isn't a permanent solution, but it is that some people, they can't start doing activity scheduling and start stepping out of sound because they're too overwhelmed.
Not everybody has access to CBT.
Absolutely, or they don't have access to it, or the chemicals in the brain are so severe that they can't even contemplate doing that, and they need, maybe medication is something they'd need to then be able to get to that point of being able to improve their activities to level them out to some degree. I think one thing, obviously, a bit of a focus as far as depression is concerned, but I think a lot of people think of depression as sadness. There is a video, and we will put links to these videos in the comments on the YouTube. One of my favorite videos for understanding depression is the Black Dog video, and I know you're you're familiar with that as well. And I've shown it to a few people who I know have been emotionally struggling, because I think, again, I have come across with people who don't realise that the depression is only sadness. I don't feel sad, so I'm not depressed. And the comment I've had from some people close to me have gone, I just feel nothing. And it's understanding that, yeah, that is depression. Depression isn't kind of extreme sadness. Depression is a lack of feeling. That's that adahema, as far as that lack of feeling completely. So talking about the kind of intermediate generation. So a lot of young people are now being raised with a difference in that it's okay for men to feel emotion, that it's okay for them to be, do whatever they want to do, and have a little bit more being raised in a slightly different way as the way they see the world, and especially around kind of equality and those sorts of things. Then you've got the older generation that I say are kind of the stoic and this is how things are and stuff like that. You've got this intergeneration that I think are in a huge transitional time period, that we're being told, you should be able to show your emotions. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to, to talk about mental health. But at the same time, we were raised with this, but it's not. And we are still surrounded by, whether it be like for my parents, for instance, that old school generation, but also as well for a male, other people around in my world, as far as the age group's concerned, that I often talk about related to dating and things like that. And if you're looking at one of the primary motivators for human beings is going to be reproduction. I think
also known as sexy time.
Also known as sexy time. But if you've got to look at it again from an innate point of view. If you're in a bar and you've got a guy who's sitting in the corner kind of looking low and crying, or you've got a guy who walks into the bar with his head up and smiling and engaging with people, which one of those is going to be perceived as attractive? It's always going to be, well, it's definitely going to be for a long time, it's going to be the guy who is happy and stuff. And that it's an innate thing. It's an understandable thing, because when you're looking at those biological factors, I think, yes, you may get some women, it's the broken bird kind of thing, but then that isn't necessarily a kind of a positive as far as they're looking to fix. They're the rescuer, which wouldn't be a positive dynamic either. I also think there's this value and purpose of being the provider. And obviously that's no longer a role that we are required for in the same way. We're also encouraged to be more, the fathers and be more active father roles. But then you look at them after relationship breakdowns, there's still an awful lot of dads out there who are then fighting for custody of their children and having equal access to their children. So we've got this kind of this weird middle ground where we're being told, this is what you've been told all your life, but now you need to change it. But at the same time, those around you still haven't changed either. So you've still got to engage in those old behaviours, but also be this new.
I think it's very hard for a man to know what to do in today's society.
Yeah.
I think it's really, really tough, because it just seems like there's no winning. If a man wants to protect and provide, then it's like you're controlling,
yes,
or you're trying to take over and you want a stay-at-home wife, and it might not be. It might just be part of that person's nature that this is what I want to do, and this is something that I enjoy doing, and that sort of stuff. There is equally, if you don't show emotion, you don't have emotion. So it's hard. It's really
I think
hard.
there's a lot of narratives out there at the moment that are potentially detrimental to kind of male mental well-being, as far as that, some of those narratives and scripts, as you mentioned, that example there of, having a preference sometimes is perceived as being controlling, getting upset, and whether that upset is, I become upset like I did a minute ago, or angry. But remember what I just said about being angry is a case of you're trying to dominate, you're trying to control. No, I'm expressing emotion in the way that I've been conditioned to express emotion. And this isn't me angry, this is me hurt, but my instinct is to go to the attack to defend myself, if that makes sense.
So you're a man.
Yes. It's been perceived. So I made that assumption.
I'll ask you the question.
Yeah.
So why is it so hard for guys to go and speak to other guys? Like, why do not many men? I know we're better and things are getting better, and we're a lot more open and honest about feeling stuff. But why do you think that men find it difficult to even approach other men to talk about, you know what, I'm feeling like crap today? Or
I think, I mean, my dad, for instance, you know, he's a good man, and he has always done his best to be there, but he is pragmatic. This is what you need to do then. The older generation absolutely have been ingrained to be problem solvers. You know, how do we sort it out then? You know, solution focused, 100%. You know, my dad did come out to me when I was having I was getting some fresh air, and just kind of said, you know, sorry, things are tough, mate. I don't know what to say, and you probably don't want to just listen to your old dad, but I'm just here. And that was enough. That was
more
it.
Than enough, yeah.
As far as why men struggle to talk to men, I think, again, it's just ingrained habits of it's showing weakness. There is the innate quality of I can't show weakness because then I'm a vulnerable target kind of thing. It's also, men don't talk. You know, I was for instance the other day, like
I don't believe that.
Well, we do talk, but certain situations when we're vulnerable, we don't talk. Like it's a common thing that the urinal example is a prime thing where I know that when, you know, I know it's more common, and obviously these are generalizations, but it's more common that if women go to the bathroom, they're usually made a friend by the time they've come out, you know, especially on a night out or anything like that. Or they'll ask each other for things, have you got this, have you got that, and the other, and they kind of help out. And there's a community that happens in the female toilet. If a guy walks into the toilet and tries to talk to anybody, they're a pariah. It's a case of, we don't talk in here, that's not what we do. We go to the toilet, we leave. So is it because we're in a state of vulnerability, and as soon as we're in a state of vulnerability, we then can't communicate at that particular point? It could be an element of that as well. Yeah,
I definitely think the younger generation is a little bit more open than maybe our generation and the one before us and stuff. I think it is slowly getting there.
Yeah,
but obviously the statistics are.
The statistics seem to be that. Obviously, mental health is getting worse. 40% have never spoken about it. Obviously, the ratio of male to female is currently sitting at a 3-1. So for every one woman that dies by suicide, 3 men have died by suicide. So one of the interesting things is, though, there was a study that was looked at by Mind, I believe it was, that in comparison to 2009, in 2019, they'd found a 3 times increase in the amount of men that were actually going to therapy. However, that's still a case of only 36% of all referrals to therapy are male, which means that it's still a huge majority of women get referrals over to mental health support than men do. But there has still been a 3 times increase, which means it's going in the right direction. It's still a long way behind, but it's still going in the right direction. I think as well, some of the courses are out there. So one of the interesting ones is first aid for mental health. And I do encourage anybody who's listening or out there who's not heard of this, whether it be mental health first aid or first aid for mental health, psychological first aid, whatever the term is. A lot of construction companies are now making it mandatory that all organizations have at least, you know, as you would a physical first aider, you have a mental health first aider. So a physical first aider is there to put a plaster on or to make sure they call 999 if somebody's physically injured. And a mental health first aider is basically keeping their eye out or a port of call for people who are struggling with stress or mental health concerns. They're there to actively kind of spot the signs and signpost these individuals over there. You know, they're not a psychologist, they're not a psychotherapist or anything like that. They are just there to kind of, oh, this doesn't seem right, signpost over. And one big thing, I don't know how you feel, is being willing to ask the question. A bit of empathy, a bit of communication, but being willing to ask the question about self-harm and suicide. Yeah. And I think that's worthwhile kind of referring to.
It's obviously on our courses, we say ask. And I think it's sometimes us getting over the fear of like, oh, we're planting seeds or we're putting ideas in people's heads, but that's on us. Yeah. It's not, you know, do you feel suicidal? Yeah. Yes, it's a shocking question, but it's something that we should be asking people.
I think the reason people worry about it is, you know, will it make the person then think about doing it if they hadn't thought about it before?
We get that a lot, don't we?
Yeah. And obviously that's, you know, if somebody asks me, if I'm don't fancy a curry and somebody goes, hey, do you fancy a curry? I'm not just suddenly going to go, oh yeah, I've never thought of that before. Yeah, I'll definitely have that. So it's exactly the same with asking that question isn't going to increase the likelihood of them acting it out.
We know it increases the likelihood of them not feeling shame about talking about it.
Absolutely. And the fact that it's, actually far more likely to reduce the risk. But I think people struggle because because there's still a stigmatization around it. It should be a normal question to ask, like, are you feeling poorly at the minute? Should be willing to go, have you thought about hurting yourself or ending your life at all? Because it's okay for me to go, no, I haven't. I'm not in that place right now, but thank you so much for asking. And it should be that kind of reaction to it. But I think there's still a slight stigma, shame, and if I ask them, what if they haven't, or they're going to think I'm judging them? Well, why did it feel like judging them? It's
I think more training's needed, don't you?
Well, the training company always think more training's needed.
There's some really good trainers, but no, I definitely think there is that still that issue there. But I think from health and social care point of view, carers are getting better with. I think family members is the hardest, one of the hardest sort of group of people to ask. Like I could ask a service user, but I'd probably find it hard to ask my dad. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah.
I think as well, like as it says in the video, and I don't know whether I might put a link into the Norwich football one rather than kind of putting another video on for people, but I think it's worthwhile watching. And I think in that one, it refers to, checking in with people every now and again.
Yeah, yeah.
So when I've been going through a tough time recently, I reached out. I spoke to the people I love the most. I'd kind of hinted that I was struggling at times, or I'm finding it difficult, but I hadn't been as explicit of how bad it was. I then opened up that dialogue and a huge amount of increased support. The only thing I would kind of say at that point, there is been some people within that have maintained that, and I'm not saying they check in every day or anything like that, but they have kind of made sure they've kept in contact and just recognizing one of the challenges I was experiencing. They've kind of keep checking in. I think you just need to be careful sometimes as far as if you only pay attention when they're at their worst.
Yeah.
It's already, why did it need to reach that point of crisis? I think it's not through any malice. It's, everybody's caught in their own world and getting on with their own lives and stuff. But it is worthwhile checking in. And in the video in the Norwich video, Football Club one? Yeah, obviously you had these two individuals, one who looks low, sad, and one who is all animated and kind of shouting and stuff from the
really friendly,
really friendly, really happy. And then it kind of shows that it was actually the one who looked unhappy, that the one who had continued to live, and the other individual had ended their life.
It's a very powerful video.
It's a very powerful video, yeah. So I watched it for the first time earlier, and we'd have another crying session if I was to put it on. So that's one that impacted on me. I've had people say to me before, but you always seem so happy. And it's, I think, there's a few things like Robin Williams is a prime example, isn't it? That the people who work the hardest to be fun are sometimes the ones who are struggling the most.
Massively, yeah.
And I think it sometimes just because we're out the woods, just because I'm not at my worst, just because I seem to be smiling again, doesn't mean that I'm having every day is a good day.
Yeah. I think checking in, especially after COVID and lockdown and stuff like that, I think we are a little bit better with, but we are caught up with our own lives. But even just that one text can just change somebody's day.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that thing, isn't it? We're more connected than we ever have before, but we're more disconnected than we ever have been before, because yes, we can talk to somebody on the phone, yes, we can check in, but we're no longer meeting up, we're no longer connecting, and it is more isolating. It doesn't have that same experience.
But what we know around mental health, like one of the biggest things, and it's not medication, it's not expensive therapy and stuff. I mean, it's part of it, but just talking can actually dramatically really help. Yeah. It doesn't fix everything. It doesn't fix all the issues and problems or solve things, but talking about something can actually prevent somebody going on further.
I think that's what felt nice to me, and maybe for your dad as well. It's felt nice that just going somebody knowing and being able to be open with and accepted for that it's taking away that stigmatization, that shame that I think is innate, and I think it's going to be a long time before particularly men are able to shed that completely, and feel open to talk about it and know that there is no shame or stigmatization. We'll get to that point, hopefully.
Yeah.
But at least if there's a few trusted individuals, if there's a few people that you can open up to 100%, be yourself, be okay to kind of cry in front of. This is where a lot of statistics show that breakdown relationships is obviously a huge trigger, that men rely on women more than women rely on men as far as emotional support's concerned, because but men don't talk to men. So suddenly if I don't have a female in my life who I can feel that I can talk to straight away, that hugely impacts. So I think that's where hopefully male support. So I know in Grantham, and I really wanted to try and have a conversation with one of the organisers, there is a mental health support group in Grantham. I believe it's called the Beehive Community Group, and they have a male mental health support group that runs twice a week.
That's amazing.
And it is men supporting men. And I think hopefully I'm trying to communicate and build a rapport with them. So I'd love to have some conversations with some of the guys who are there, as well as the people who organise it and volunteer for it, because it would be nice to have them on and talk about that, and because I think that's a really positive thing, definitely. So has your dad taken any steps as far as?
I think talking was the biggest thing for him. So just letting somebody know. Yeah. And we stayed in contact. Obviously, he's back with us now in Leicester, which is really nice. And I think him having a bit more of a community around him. Isolation was a big thing, and loneliness. So him having his community back has really helped him.
Yeah.
He doesn't seem ashamed when he talks about it.
Yeah.
He's still quite emotional about it, but I'm super proud of him for being able to talk so openly and honestly about it. And he, for the most stoic man I've ever met in my life, he's actually been brilliant, bless him.
Yeah. And that's it. And it's the fact that he's been comfortable with you actually referring to him in the podcast, obviously not saying his name and stuff, but the fact that those who know you will know him and stuff like that. The fact that I think that's so important, being willing to be open. And as you said, expressing my emotions as much as I feel a little embarrassed, because that's one of the things, like 29% of men don't go seek help because they feel embarrassed by it and shameful, or the stigma about it. I think, the more people who are willing to kind of go, this tough, this life, and we all need a little bit of help at times, and male, female, or whatever. I think, definitely a little bit more support required, a little bit more sense of community. Would be good. So, okay, I think we'll call it a session on that, hopefully, and I'll go and have myself a new coffee and sort myself out.
Well, thank you for sharing your experiences, and I think it will be appreciated by people as well.
So we'll put some links down to some charities that offer some additional support. There's some that are specifically for males, as well as obviously your general charities for mental well-being. Obviously, we would love people out there who are watching this. If there's something that affects you directly, comment, like and subscribe, message us. We would very much value kind of input, feedback from the session, as well as potentially looking at running some further sessions in this particular subject as well.
It's a broad subject.
It is, and obviously we could talk about it and cover lots of different aspects to it. But for now, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.